Pope Leo appointed a new Australian bishop with a controversial track record. We'll tell you about him. And is it time for a female to play Jesus in a musical at the Hollywood Bowl? The Prayerful Posse is assembling. Welcome to this Arroyo Grande series, The Prayerful Posse, where we dive into matters of faith and its impact on culture. Let's convene the posse. Joining us is Robert Royal, editor-in-chief of the CatholicThing.org. Father Jerry Murray is out riding the plains, but we'll catch up with him in the days ahead. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Go subscribe to the Arroyo Grande podcast on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube at Arroyo Grande Show. We don't want you to miss an episode of the Posse. Bob, we said weeks ago the bishop appointments of Pope Leo would give us a sense of his vision and a sense of where this papacy is going. Well, now, this week, Pope Leo appointed his first archbishop in a major archdiocese in Australia. He named a second Australian prelate this week as well. But Bishop Shane Macklay will be the new Archbishop of Brisbane, Australia. Now, Macklay attended the 2024 Vatican Synod on Synodality. He was chosen to help draft that final document, very controversial. Macklay is also publicly in favor of the ordination of women to the diaconate as deacons, and we can presume the priesthood. Bob, your thoughts on this appointment by a pope who was formerly the head of the dicastery of bishops? What does it tell us about the mind of Leo XIV and the direction of the church?
Well, it's a big question, Raymond, and I think we need to look at this from several different directions, because on the one hand, we know that Leo has spoken against, for example, LGBT, which this new archbishop seems to favor, at least ministering to. But the way he talks about it is the way very often we hear Father James Martin talk about it. And that is, you know, we're faithful to the tradition, but we're pastorally reaching out. And to me, this kind of two-step, I think, covers over the fact that activists are perfectly happy to use this to advance what is quite clearly not the orthodox teaching of the Catholic Church. So that's one thing. Yeah. The other thing is that he has spoken very highly of the German synodal way, which is a very, very heterodox approach to a whole bunch of different questions. And we know that the Vatican, at least under Pope Francis, with whom Pope Leo was very close, was very skeptical of what the Germans were trying to do, thought of this as potentially schismatic. So there are different parts to this. Now, he must know this new archbishop very well. And maybe there are other sides to him. We hear that he's a good administrator, he's a very bright man, he listens to people. But this kind of mixture of a good figure with possibly heterodox ideas, I think might be something we'll see further. But we'll see. Maybe this was an appointment that was already in the pipeline. He could certainly have said no about it. But I'm not convinced that this is particularly a strong sign. We'll have to just see where it goes after this.
Well, there's some chatter online, and of course, I've been getting emails this week. Remember, Bob, back in May, Pope Leo confirmed a Father Beat Grogli as the Bishop of St. Gallen, Switzerland. You remember that nomination? Now, that was just a confirmation because it's kind of an odd church pick. You know, the local church has a hand in choosing that bishop. But he, too, this father, soon-to-be Bishop Beat Grogli, is also a supporter of female ordination. And people are saying, wait a minute, this is worrisome. Is this the direction we're going, that we're going to choose bishops who support ordaining women to the diaconate or the priesthood? And, I mean, as you rightly pointed out early on, Prevost, the new Pope, Pope Leo, he said back in 2023, I'll give you the quote here, "I think we're all familiar with the very significant and long tradition of the Church, and that the apostolic tradition is something that has been spelled out very clearly, especially if you want to talk about the question of women's ordination to the priesthood." So it seems he is with the traditional church on this and the church teaching and history.
Yeah, look, we need to distinguish here that the question right now is female deaconesses. Mm-hmm. So there are people who are in favor of this and present it as if it is just a minor order, that it doesn't portend the ordination of women as priests. But look, we know how these things get going. There's snowballs that start small, and they sneak, if I can mix my metaphors, they sneak the camel's nose under the tent, and they become larger and larger until it just becomes inevitable. Now, one of the other factors I think about this appointment in Brisbane is that it was Cardinal Mark Coleridge who preceded the new bishop. We met with Cardinal Coleridge several times during the many synods that have taken place over the past few years, and he always seemed to me, he's very well spoken, he's very smart, but he always seemed to me to be on, if I can put it this way, the peripheries of dogma. He was kind of always open to the next step and happy about advancing, if you want to call it this, progressive kind of moves within the church. So maybe he had an influence about this appointment. It's certainly not a strong appointment for people who are concerned about the orthodoxy of the church. But I want to say again, we're still in the early stages, and there are different reasons. Look, we know that John Paul II appointed McCarrick, Bergoglio, Cardinal Casper. So even some of the popes that we look up to the most have kind of checkered records when it comes to who they appoint. There may be multiple reasons why they appoint some person, maybe somebody locally, but I want to see, I think I would like to see some stronger movement on the part of Pope Leo. He's spoken very strongly against LGBT. He's talked about how we shouldn't be discussing genders that don't exist. He seems to be very strong, as you rightly say, against the ordination of women. But are the appointments, we know that in a way personnel are policy.
Right.
So we need to see some serious appointments coming from him as well.
Well, that's what I always say. Look, watch. People ask me, tell me about the Pope. I said, well, watch the appointments, see what he does. We did this in our earliest show when we talked about Pope Leo. See what he does about the old Latin Mass. What does he do about the China deal? But appointments, the day-to-day appointment of men who will spread throughout the world and carry his vision of the church forward, that is, it's beyond people or policy. It's really, people are dogma. People are the church. This becomes the visible face of what Catholicism is or will be in the conception of the new Pope. Now, everybody wants to know, who is the new Pope? Who is Pope Leo? An Argentinian bishop, Alberto Bochate, a decades-long friend of former Cardinal Robert Prevost, now Pope Leo, is speaking out this week. Bob, he says Pope Francis considered Prevost one of the hopes among the cardinals. And he says Pope Leo is more of a formal man than Francis and will keep the form, but change the contents of the papacy. What does that mean, Bob? What do you think that means?
Well, of course, that could be a problem. I've heard from reliable sources that when Robert Prevost was in Peru, that he used to require, and bishop, he used to require his priests, for example, to properly vest even when they went into the confessional. So he seems to like this continuity of form. Now, a continuity of form can coexist with a lot of changes in content, obviously. One of the contents I'd like to see in changes is the idea of synodality, so that we actually get some substance and some clarity about what
we're going to get to that. I promise we'll get to the synodality discussion.
But again, we have to look. I mean, we have to look at what concrete steps he takes. These appointments, what are the kinds of things that they're going to do? I mean, obviously, lots of traditional or orthodox religious bodies within the church have suffered recently of persecution, whether it's the Latin Mass or some of the more conservative religious orders. So I think that those are going to be the tipping points at which we're really going to see the shape and the direction of what this Pope intends to do with the church.
Yeah. Cardinal Mario Grech, who some will remember was the general secretary of that synod on bishops, or of bishops, that really included laity, he's claiming this week, quote, the shortage of vocations can be a grace from God, Bob, because it opens the door to the laity to expand their role in the church, even administering the sacraments. Here's the full quote. The shortage of vocations can be a grace from God. Some are scandalized by these words because it could prompt the church to recognize and utilize the diverse gifts present among all Christians rather than concentrating power solely within the clergy, end quote. Boy, there's a lot there to unpack. What do you make of that thought, the thought process here? You know, and let's not forget the hostility that's often thrown at traditional seminaries, Bob, with lots of vocations. But that idea that let's not concentrate all the power solely within the clergy. Comment on that.
Yeah, this idea of, who holds power is kind of a crypto-Marxist approach, because who holds power tells you nothing. All it tells you is that some people are more powerful than others. Right. The question is what they are doing with that power. Is it just? Is it proper? Is it right that they have that power? I have to say, maybe Malta is a different place than places I'm familiar with, but I don't see that there's an over-dominance of clergy in very many places. It seems to me that the laity have long been on the ascendancy. At least here in the United States, laity do an awful lot of the heavy lifting. I mean, look at the two of us. We've been at this stuff for a dozen years together, trying to figure out where the church ought to go. I mean, maybe we've not done it well, but I think we've tried to do our best at it. Mm-hmm. So, look, to me, this is a rationalization. This is whistling past the graveyard. A decline in the leadership of an institution. It signals that there's something wrong at the top, where there are good bishops, where there's a strong and clear idea of what the faith is. Of course, young men are attracted to that, just in the same way that they're attracted to the military, or they're attracted to very good universities. People who are talented and ambitious and actually want to make a contribution to the world aren't going to see that they are able to do that if they're going to be just kind of tolerated, while the laity are going to become the primary movers of things. I'm a great believer that the laity are going to play a major role in saving the church in our time.
Well, and I got news for Cardinal Greg. The power in the church has always been with the laity. That is the incubator for vocations. It's where all priests and cardinals and bishops and popes come from. And we do hold the purse strings. If the as we'll talk about in our next story, if the laity decides not to give of their treasure, hard-earned, to the church, that church ceases to exist, at least there and in that form.
Cardinal Newman was once asked if the church needed the laity, and he said she would look awfully foolish without them.
A good insight, as all of his insights were. Bob, the Diocese of Buffalo announced this week, speaking of withholding of funds or possibly the giving of them, the Diocese of Buffalo is asking parishes to contribute $80 million of the $150 million sex abuse settlement it entered back in April. Now, that settlement covers over 800 claims of sexual abuse. According to the diocese, each parish will receive a detailed statement of their, quote, expected contribution to the settlement fund. Your thoughts? I mean, I don't know how much money they're going to pull in this way, Bob.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with upstate New York because my wife grew up in that area, and it used to be a very strong Catholic area. Most of those big cities, Syracuse, Rochester, Albany, now they've been hollowed out because the factories have moved out of there. The standard of living has really declined. So I think this is going to put a lot of pressure on those parishes up there. I mean, maybe they're going to just have to do it to rescue that diocese. But this just shows ways in which sin and bad behavior in any organization are disastrous, even far beyond. We're very sympathetic to what happened to the victims of these abusers. But what about all the people in the pews who are struggling to get by in this day and age and are being asked to bail out an institution that didn't do the right thing, 10, 20, 30, 40 years? There's going to be some resentments, and I'm going to be surprised, actually, if they're able to pull this off. Maybe they can kind of spread out the rescue over a longer period. But there's going to be a resistance, and I think we're going to hear some loud voices about it. Yeah, well, here's the statement by Bishop Michael Fisher of Buffalo, which is interesting. Quote, as we've maintained throughout the protracted process, the participation of the entire Catholic family is necessary to bring a close to this painful chapter of our diocese, and to achieve a level of restitution that is owed to the many who have had to carry the tremendous burden of physical, emotional, and spiritual harm of sexual abuses throughout their lives. Look, Bob, I think everybody is sensitive to this. The question is, what did the church do in the past? What are they going to do now to make sure it doesn't happen again? And as you said,
when financial hard times hit an area like upstate New York, they're not the people to bail. They can't come up with this kind of cash.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there are legal ways to deal with this. You just go through a bankruptcy. This is what happens with corporations as well. But it's really a very sad day when some of these places that once were very vibrant, I hear about the beautiful churches in a lot of these cities, some of which I've actually visited, and they're actually quite stunning that, during the period of large immigration, our Catholic people built these things up. And, maybe we're all going to just have to bite the bullet and do this again. But how sad that we're not building up the way we once were able to do, and now we're much wealthier than we were in the past. But what we're doing actually is just trying to stay afloat and to compensate for things that were mishandled in the past. I think our bishops are trying to do a decent job with this. I would like to see some more energy coming out of Rome, because as we've known, there have been some lingering cases even there. This is one thing that is really going to be on the plate of Leo, and it's not going to only be in the United States, it's going to be elsewhere as well.
Well, yeah, Bob, this is another weird story. Also, upstate New York, All Saints Catholic Church in Syracuse held an LGBT Pride Mass on Trinity Sunday. The pastor, who is self-described as a gay priest, Father Fred Daly, welcomed a transgender, the female-to-male Episcopalian, to deliver the homily, where he proceeded to speak about transitioning.
As part of Pride Weekend, I'm very honored to welcome to our AMBO today Mr. Kevin Noble Ward, who will share with us his journey to the truth.
I felt that I was a boy on the inside, but everyone kept telling me that I was a girl.
Bob, your thoughts first on what is happening there.
Yeah, it's an outrage. Look, you put up a rainbow flag inside a church. And this is what we were talking about earlier with this new Archbishop in Brisbane, that, if you talk about pastoral outreach to people, it has to be done in a careful way. It has to be done in a way that doesn't affirm them in what is disordered behavior. It is objectively disordered. It's objectively disordered in biology as much as it is in Catholic moral thought. But to do this and to take a whole parish and drag them into this extreme position within the church, I think that this is what is likely to happen if we start getting too promiscuous, if I can put it that way, in our pastoral outreach. Look, you can be sympathetic to a sinner. We're all sinners. You can be sympathetic to the weaknesses when a person breaks down. But the sympathy doesn't extend to actually almost celebrating what a person is doing, which seems to me what is happening here. And activists love these sorts of circumstances. It makes it look like the church is being, brutally hateful toward certain groups of people. And it puts pressure on those people who want to resist this sort of decline within the church. So, look, it has all kinds of ramifications, and the best way to deal with it is to snuff it out right at the beginning. I just hope that the local bishop is adequate to the task.
Well, here's the part two of this story. Same parish, All Saints Church in Syracuse. The bishop, Douglas Lucia, came out with a statement because there was an LGBT flag flying in front of the church. Someone came and tore it down. The bishop released this statement: I have learned of the unfortunate incident regarding the pride flag. It certainly does not reflect the love and compassion that this month, dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, wishes to promote, end quote. The diocese later said liturgical irregularities with that priest we talked about a moment ago would be discussed with him by the bishop, and that there's a policy of forbidding politically charged banners in front of a church. But Bob, then why take such umbrage when it's taken down?
Yeah. Well, see, I think this is the default position that they all take. We're not hateful, we're not exclusionary, but it's not hateful to teach what the church teaches, because it's what God teaches. This is what our colleague, Father Jerry Murray, constantly emphasizes, that it's actually a grace. It's actually a loving act to tell people, look, yeah, we'll work with you, we'll meet with you. If you need counseling, we'll help you. But we're not going to put up flags to this when we don't put up flags to a whole variety of other things that are much closer into what the Catholic Church is all about. There are people who even complain about American flags inside of a church near an altar. So look, I regret when bishops do this sort of thing, because I really think it's a half-hearted response to the situation. Okay, you want to defend Catholics. We are not hateful. We understand that. But this is also, for some people, Pride Month. And I think our Sacred Heart of Jesus, we could have had an image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus that would be inviting people in front of that church. That would have been far more appropriate.
It was also announced this week, Bob, going internationally here, that a flourishing Cistercian Abbey in Austria will receive an apostolic visitation in the fall. Now, an apostolic visitation is when the Vatican authorizes a group of people to go and investigate. So it's not just a visitation, it's an investigation of that place. In this case, the Catholic Abbey of the Holy Cross. Some reports say this investigation or visitation was ordered by Pope Francis before his death. More often than not, this doesn't bode well for the institutions. Now, we do know this is one of Austria's largest and most traditional monasteries, Bob. There are over 100 monks in residence, and the visitators will be a Benedictine abbot, a religious sister who does not wear a habit. Why do you think this visitation was called? And why is it proceeding if it was instigated initially under Pope Francis's reign?
Yeah, I would hope that Leo would be alerted to things like this and would be very cautious in proceeding with them. Some of the reports seem to suggest that one of the reasons why this abbey is being visited is because they have raised a question of whether the way synodality has proceeded in the last several years, whether it doesn't call into question the authority that ordained figures within the church have over lay people. Actually, the whole question of authority and obedience is something that Pope Leo studied when he was doing his PhD at the Angelicum University in Rome. And so he may have some developed ideas about this. I mean, he certainly seems to have run things in a peaceful but pretty firm way everywhere he's been. And I think that already has come through in the way he's conducted himself. But it looks very much like this is coming in to either tell people to get in line behind this kind of expanded idea of who has authority along the lines of Cardinal Gretsch, the way we were just talking about it, and maybe even go further. It's regrettable that all these places that seem to be successful, something similar happened in France, where hundreds of people are flocking to these places because they like the certainty that's presented as the church teaching. Obviously, you have to work throughout your life to accommodate yourself to what the church teaches. No one arrives and automatically becomes a saint. But the places that seem to be attracting the most people and have the most lively of Catholics are often the ones like the TLM, like the traditional Latin Mass, who are drawing scrutiny rather than a kind of a study which would say, well, why is it precisely that these things are succeeding?
Yeah, Bob, look, this is a thought I had while you were talking. I mean, they target these vibrant houses of orthodoxy, but there's a reason that there are large numbers of seminarians, and that's attractive. Rather than trying to figure out what are they attracted to, let's replicate that. It seems there's an incentive within the church to commit hara-kiri and kill off the things that are working, and therefore scatter the seminarians, scatter those who are drawn to this. It's a very peculiar, odd moment, and I think it's a challenge for Pope Leo at this moment to address that. It's a crisis. You see it at Bishop Ray in France, same deal, had a large number of young seminarians, but they wanted orthodoxy. They wanted the old Mass, and that became verboten. So it's like we don't want that type of seminarian, even if it means we have none others. I'll give you the word on that.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot, that actually Benedict XVI I think had the solution for this, and that is that you allow the largest diversity of authentic Catholicism that fits within orthodoxy. I mean, there are going to be obviously people who are more attracted, let's say, to social justice issues. There are going to be some that are going to be more attracted to working with the poor. Some are going to be attracted to the intellectual life. Others are going to be. I mean, there's just there are specific, even religious orders devoted to these things, let alone individual persons. And why shut down, especially in Austria, which is really hurting? I go to Austria every year because we run a program in Eastern Europe, and I go through Vienna every year, and some years it makes my hair stand on end, some of the things I see in the churches there. I mean, you've probably seen reported here in the West some of the so-called artworks that are displayed, and some of the activities that take place inside those churches. Those activities are going to drive people away. A place like this monastery is going to attract monks, and it's also going to inspire lay people who see that there is real Catholicism still alive in Austria.
Yeah, well, people are giving themselves to a faith, giving themselves to something larger than their own lives and their selfish wants. I mean, when you see 100 monks, I mean, my Lord, do everything you can to preserve that rather than using one, who knows, there might be one little error, but all of us have little errors in a community. I mean, any community, there's something wrong, Bob. But when you send the full force of, this is like the federal government coming in and investigating a domestic dispute. This is the Vatican coming in and doing a full-scale investigation, and it rarely ends well. Well, echoing our discussion earlier, Pope Leo's friend, who observed that Leo is a formal man who likes to keep the form, the Pope spoke this week about Sacre Polyphony, chant, the blending of voices on different notes and where you get that beautiful blend. He said this: Polyphony itself, moreover, is a musical form full of meaning for prayer and for Christian life. He went on to call the polyphonic tradition, even today, a point of reference to look to, albeit with necessary adaptations. Bob, your thoughts on the Pope's love of chant, sacred music, and that necessary adaptations line?
Yeah. I didn't know this, but I ran across it in some article recently that he is a gifted organist.
I didn't know that.
The head of the Augustinians right now said that he would often play the organ at masses, and he's actually quite skilled at it. So he himself is a musician, and he understands those sorts of things. I'm pleased about this. There have been several figures on both, if you want to call it this, the right and the left in the church, who have said that he's kind of a centrist, he's kind of a moderate. It's one of the reasons why both wings of the church were able to come to an agreement on him so quickly during the last conclave. And I hope that really starts to play out. And one of the aspects of not polyphony, but many types of music is you tolerate some odd notes now and then. If you've ever read J.R.R. Tolkien's Silmarillion, which is his creation story, God sings the universe into existence. And then the devils start introducing some sour notes. But then God takes those sour notes and, like a jazz player, he kind of integrates them into an even more interesting chromatic tapestry than just the usual things that you would expect in music. So look, if he's really a musician, he's thinking in these terms, and he's used that opportunity to talk about the way that different voices can blend, I would really like to see that be developed in the way he governs and in how he treats the different elements within the church. Because God knows we really need to be a little bit more tolerant of authentic Catholicism, which doesn't mean narrowness, doesn't necessarily even mean conservatism, but those different voices that can be brought to a harmony, or if there are clashes, to a resolution of the harmony, into a harmony at a certain point.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to describe. But let's hope the path that Pope Leo proceeds down, and I hope he's listening and watching. Actress Cynthia Erivo, Bob, I'm going to take you to pop culture for a minute. Of Wicked fame, she plays the Green Witch Elba. She will play Jesus in a production of Jesus Christ Superstar at the Hollywood Bowl in August. Adam Lambert will play Judas, and other cast members are still to be announced. She appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, who couldn't be more thrilled that Jesus will be portrayed by a woman. Watch.
One of my favorite musicals of all time is Jesus Christ Superstar. I love that. And I'm so excited that in August you're going to be playing Jesus.
That's right.
In Jesus Christ Superstar at the Hollywood Bowl.
That's right, yeah.
At the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah.
First woman to play Jesus in a major production, long overdue. I've said for years I'd love to see a woman in that part.
Bob, your thoughts, especially on this encouragement by Colbert?
Look, I think this is the recovation of our culture, this idea that Jesus couldn't be who he was. We talk in the Catholic Church about the incarnation. The incarnation means God chose to become man, and in this case particularly a male, and in this case in particularly a Jew, and someone in the Middle East at what is referred to as in the fullness of time. What does it tell us really, that there has to be this so-called alternative casting? I mean, it tells us that who Jesus was in his incarnated state at the time that God himself chose is not adequate to presenting Jesus in the modern world, that somehow a black lesbian woman who's a singer is a better representative in the public square of who Jesus is. I just don't get this. Or actually, I do get it. What it is another way to try to advance confusion and smuggle in ideas of race and of power and of sexuality where they don't belong. You just can't. Look, I love Shakespeare, and very often when I'm in London, I will go to the Globe Theatre, which is a reconstructed model of Shakespeare's own theatre back in the 1600s. That place has been absolutely wrecked by the alternative casting that they do now. People sometimes are still good actors or actresses, but it tilts everything away from what we go to Shakespeare for. And I think in the same way, why do we go to a performance of a black lesbian female Jesus? It certainly isn't for the Jesus of history and the Jesus of the church.
All right, let's move on. Pope Leo is speaking of synodality again. He addressed the bishops of Italy this week about synodality, saying, "May synodality become a mentality in your heart and decision-making processes and in ways of acting." Now, Bob, is this a rebranding of synodality, or is this the rehabilitation of Pope Francis's ephemeral version of it?
Well, I think what we have to do is we have to see, as we've been saying all along in this episode, what he's going to do when he says that. You know, lots of people have pointed out, for example, that when you are going to be talking about things like LGBT in a synod, right? You want to get authentic input about the question so that you can make decisions that are as well-based as they possibly can be. So who were invited to the last synod, however? It wasn't the people here in the United States who are Orthodox, but are trying to work with people with a same-sex attraction. It wasn't working with people who work with young people who may be confused and may think that they're trans or something. No, what we had was a selection, and a deliberate selection, it seems to me, of people all on one side of the aisle with this. So, look, if you want to listen to all voices, fine, but let's make sure that it is going to be all voices so that we do come together in that harmony. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it until now, and the proof will be in the pudding that as the specific events take place, or specific decisions are made that are allegedly synodal, we want to see who's invited to have input.
Finally, Bob, the Archbishop of Los Angeles, Jose Gomez, has waded into the immigration policy this week. In an op-ed in his diocesan paper, Gomez argues that the U.S. needs, quote, a new conversation about immigration. He condemns the mass deportations in his city of Los Angeles, saying the government should, quote, judge each case on its merits. Your thoughts? According to Archbishop Gomez, the conversation should be one that's realistic and makes necessary moral and practical distinctions about those in our country illegally. Sounds like he wants to separate criminal aliens from illegal aliens who've come across the border with no permission.
Well, look, I'm in agreement with him that it would be good to have a national conversation and to get Congress to do something about it, but we've been talking about this for 40 or 50 years. It's like negotiating with Iran. I mean, you can negotiate till the cows are home, but nothing ever really happens. The two parties are just have two different visions of what a reform would be like, and I don't expect in my lifetime, frankly, that I'm going to see a Congress that is going to pass a reform bill on immigration. On the specifics, I've got to say I'm somewhat in sympathy with him. I've said this before that. Look, if someone came here 10, 20 years ago, they've been working, paying taxes, conducting themselves in a good manner. The fact that we allowed them to be here for all this time establishes a certain moral responsibility on our part. Now, I know this sounds squishy, but it just seems to me that there is a moral complication there that the country has allowed that to happen. With the more recent immigrants, I feel a little bit less sympathetic because I think that they took advantage. Tens of thousands, actually millions, took advantage of the fact that the border was essentially open, flooded in, and I don't know that we have quite as great a responsibility to adjudicate each one of those cases. Now,
look, your heart breaks, Bob. Look, I've been there when they come across the border. They're coming because they were told the border was, the Biden administration, I was just looking at the stats, 63,000 plus immigrants came across the border with no permission at all. No, they didn't get in line at all. No green card, nothing. They came across the border because, as you said, there was a sense that the border was open. Now they get here, they're standing outside of Home Depot, and there's a criminal sweep through Home Depot, and they get swept up in it. Well, I understand, but they do violate the current statute, which is you cannot enter the country illegally. That is the federal law of the land.
No, and the Archbishop, rightly says that we have to judge practicalities. But some of the practicalities our immigration courts are already wildly overbooked. So even people who have dates to come back to court hearings about whether they have refugee status or whatever their status might be, it can take years even for the regular process to work. And now if you're going to add 10 million more, at least 10 million more people who have to be processed in some fashion through a court system that is utterly incapable of processing them. I don't know what the response is possible other than to try to manage it as well we can. I think that the people who are running ICE are primarily focused on criminals. And you rightly say, if there's a sweep, some of these cases are going to be heartbreaking, but the country has got to get a grip on this.
Well, Bob, we will leave it there. And if you'd like more of the Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse, subscribe to the Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or Arroyo Grande Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And like this episode. That means a lot, not only to us, but to Bob. Bob has a family to take care of. You want to help us. Like the episode on behalf of Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray. Until the posse rides again, stay the course and follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We'll see you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.